Morning, my name is Charlie and I'm an alcoholic. Before I get wound up here, I'd like to thank Jim W. for asking me to come out here. Jim is a great example of this program, and I really admire him and respect him for the work he's put into this convention, and it's certainly a privilege to be asked to be here today. And I'd like to thank Richard for picking me up at the airport yesterday, and yesterday was a long day. I've had a great week, and I had the week off, and I went to New England and kind of lounged around and visited with an AA friend who moved there, and just did nothing all week, just vegetated, and it was like being married again. It was really a nice time, and I took a 3-hour bus ride into Boston yesterday and took a 2-hour flight to Nashville, and then in Nashville I had 10 minutes to get from one terminal to another to get on my plane to San Antonio, and everything worked out except I had this shirt preserved in starch just so I could wear it today. It was really nice. It was nice and pressed, and I think they backed that little truck over it a few times just to make sure that it was screwed up, but they got my luggage here and everything, so my day's been it's been a great time. The minute I got here, Richard was at the airport, and it's just like with alcoholics. You can meet somebody the first time, and if they're an alcoholic, you sort of feel like you've known them for a long time. It's a real interesting phenomenon. And we had a nice chat, and I got kind of swept up in all this yesterday, and it's really been fun. This is a great place to be. I love San Antonio. Just to temper what Vince said last night about Texans, I don't have any problem with Texans. I like Texans. I had a great time. I was here a couple of years ago at the Club 12, and I had a wonderful time then, and I'm having a good time now. I have trouble with the human race. Basically, that's why I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. It wasn't alcohol. It was you bastards that did me in. I had no problem at all with... Alcohol was working just fine, and I guess the human race saw fit to kind of up their ante a little bit and keep pressing, so I had to drink more, and then here I am on a Saturday morning on April Fool's Day. Well, yeah, thanks, Jim. Certainly no scheduling coincidence there. Also, being from California, I heard all the disparaging California remarks last night from Al, and I started to put two and two together. That's why there was a fruit basket in my room this morning, no doubt. But we're forgiving in California. We accept anybody, obviously. I don't know what to say. I'm just a drunk, basically. Not unlike anybody else here, I suppose. I had a horrifying childhood. My parents loved me. And I don't know about you, but if there's one thing worse than being hated by everybody on earth, which a lot of people apparently came into AA saying, when I came into AA, everybody hated me and everybody was terrified of me. And when I walked into my first meeting, people stepped back, and I used to dream of that happening. I wanted people to be terrified of me. I wanted to give off these Darth Vader hormones to kind of back people up. I wanted to be cruel and wicked. My problem is I was a nice guy. My parents loved me. We were so polite to each other in the house. When I first came to AA, I couldn't relate to people who said, I grew up in an alcoholic household. I went to bed with automatic weapons fire in the living room. My parents beating each other with Louisville sluggers, and mom pushing dad's face onto the stove and that kind of stuff. My parents had just, my mother would lean in my room and say, "Good night, honey," and shut the door. And I'd lay there in the dark for half an hour wondering what she meant, Good by whose standards, okay? And I've been one of those people all my life as a thinker and a cogitator and mulling things around. And I've always known what the big picture was. And obviously you don't, or I wouldn't feel the way I do, and that is that I'm responsible for everything that's going on around me. I understand how the world really is. I do. I don't think you do. That's my big problem, is I really don't think you understand. And since I can't get you up to my level, it's my responsibility to bring myself down to your level. And that's why I drank. If you want what I have, you've probably got it. I had all the benefits. I grew up in a nice lower middle class family. My dad was a carpenter, and I like to say my mother was a virgin woman. But I had this, we lived in the San Fernando Valley in California, which is a nice middle class suburb, and then I guess they were fleeing political persecution or something. They moved to Orange County, and my dad was the only Democrat there, and I was humiliated. I was trying to get him to take the Kennedy bumper sticker off the car. I remember one time because the kids were talking. And I was a loner my whole life. I've always felt special, and I hate that term, so don't ever use it around me, but special is 50% off as far as I'm concerned. But I always felt unique amongst people. I always felt as if that I were one beat behind. And I heard someone say this when I was new, and I forget who it was because I'd like to give him credit for it. But this person said that he had the feeling that everybody in the world knew something about him that he didn't know, and they wouldn't tell him what it was. And I had that same feeling. It's like when nobody tells you your fly's open, and then you realize it later on, and you just hate everybody for that. It's like it's all their fault because they all knew and they didn't tell you. And that's how I felt my whole life, is defensive about everything, about being ugly, about being over-informed. I had this contradiction in life. We had this nice, polite family that there was love there. There was really love there. My parents went out of their way to be kind to me and to show me their love, even though they had difficulty expressing it in many ways. And they gave me a good set of principles, as Vince was saying last night, and my teachers gave me a good education and set of principles, and I had all the benefits that a human being really ought to have. And I'm still an alcoholic. And I still have the same exact disease that a guy whose parents beat him up, or a woman whose husband beat her up, or people who grew up in a bad neighborhood, or grew up in a slum, or grew up in Bel Air. I have the same exact disease, and that's what makes us all alike, and that's what makes Alcoholics Anonymous work, is the similarity that we have. And I don't know why I felt the way I did. I don't think it's important. I'm sure I can go to a bookstore and find any number of texts to help explain the manifestations of my disease. The 12 steps as explained by, so-and-so, or women who love too much, or guys who can't get enough. There are all these different books that are out about these things that try to make, it's like last-ditch attempts to be different from everybody in AA. It's that sure I'm an alcoholic, and sure I did all this stuff, and sure I'm trying to stay sober, but there's something else that I need that the rest of you don't seem to understand. And that's where this, I see this proliferation of literature coming out about the 12 steps analyzed by Zeke, some mysterious person who takes himself on to be some authority on Alcoholics Anonymous. And none of us are authorities on AA. We're just drunks. We're not authorities on anything, obviously. And what I'm saying to you this morning is just my own opinion. It doesn't have any validity any more than I believe what I'm saying. And if you believe it too, then welcome to AA. We are the creme de la scum. We are the best of the worst in the world. We are the lucky ones who we happen to have a disease, and we're the lucky ones who know how to treat it. But it's a day at a time thing. It's a real it's a road, as they say in the book. It's not something that you just get. It's something that takes a long time. I don't have the most boring drunkalog in Alcoholics Anonymous. I really don't even want to get into it. I drank, okay. I had blackouts. I got drunk when I was 18, my first drunk, which is late by AA standards, certainly. We have fetal drinkers in my group, It's like my mother drank, and that was my first big buzz. And I was in her womb, I remember, and I did shameful things. I did enough shameful stuff before I had a drink. And then I had a drink and realized, hey, now I can do shameful stuff and feel fine about it. I was all set up to be an alcoholic. I had locked myself. When I was 14, I painted my room black and put in dark green, avocado green shag carpet. And I went in there and put on my Rolling Stones albums and just sat there. And I came out when I was 18, a changed person. I was a good test taker in school, like Vince was. I had great SAT scores, which does not help you get girls, incidentally. Nobody wants to come up and look at your verbal scores. Had an ability to communicate pretty well, but I was always masking something that I knew I was lacking. I knew that there was something missing inside of me that you all had, and I had to keep running double time and keep putting up this front and keep throwing these things out so that you would pay attention to those things and you would never have to get close to what I was. And I never knew that until I got sober. And I never knew that sober until a few years after I'd taken an inventory and all this stuff had settled and I realized exactly what was happening. And I realized that I'm not that same person anymore. I try not to be. I am in many ways the same person who came into AA, but in many ways in most ways my life has been altered completely by this program, by the steps. I enjoyed drinking from the moment I got that first swallow down. I remember that vividly, and I know people who are as alcoholic as I am who don't remember their first drunk, but I do. And I remember what it did for me at the time, and that was that it took all of those pieces that I felt like I had a little piece of this here and a little piece of this and a little influence here and things here, and I never could put them all together. And when I drank, that was really the thing, that was the medium in which everything mixed and worked. If you took a puzzle, and this is the only analogy I can use that works for me. If I had a puzzle of what life was supposed to be, a picture of life, and we all have our individual pictures of what life ought to be, because most of us know when it's not that way. I walk out in the morning, I say, no, this isn't it. This is not the picture, because it doesn't fit. We've got this template of life that we put up against every situation, and if it doesn't fit, screw it. I don't know about you, but if it doesn't fit, I go find someplace where it does fit. And if I had the picture of life, whatever that is, and had it on this podium as a puzzle, and I took those pieces and I threw them everywhere, all over the place, scattered them all over, and you film that. I got the video camera on over here. And you film that, and then you run the film backwards, so all those pieces came flying out of nowhere and came right together in front of me right here, just like they had before I started throwing them. That's what alcohol did for me in my life. When I drank, all of a sudden, everything seemed to make sense. I just felt such relief that I didn't have to grind on things, that I didn't have to feel hate for people that I wanted to love, that I didn't have to feel disappointment in people that I placed too high on a pedestal, that I understood them better. Alcohol made me a better person. It really did. It made me like you, which is the most important thing in my whole life. I really am learning now that it isn't so important that you like me, but it is really important that I like you, because when I don't like you, that's what makes me uncomfortable. And that's when I drink, is when I'm not happy with you. And you're not going to change. And I have to change. And that's what alcohol did for me. It altered me completely. It made me feel good inside. And I couldn't... We've got this just say no thing going on now, which is obviously the design of a non-alcoholic. What kind of logic is this? You find something that makes you feel human for the first time in your whole life. No thanks. I'd just rather be a belligerent asshole my whole life. Thank you. Alcohol might hurt me in the long run. When I got that first swallow down, I couldn't think of anything else I would rather do than to feel the way I felt. And I realized then that was something, I just thought it worked for everybody. I really thought that alcohol had that effect on everybody, and I couldn't understand that it didn't. I never asked. I just assumed that it did. And I started hanging around, I was hanging around with these bikers, and, I didn't fit in, but I fit in when we drank. And I wasn't a biker, believe me. Bikes frighten me. It's just rev the engine and I hide. It's like the noise scares me, and I'm more the bookstore type, Nothing I like after reading a little Charles Dickens and going out and whooping a little ass, but always gets a big reaction in Texas. I see people jumping up going, yeah, okay. Noon, out in the lobby, meet me, we'll go kick some ass. Okay. But I used to like to be around people. I lived through their adventures. I'm easily influenced by people. I like going around people. I like listening to their talk and they're walking their walk and listening to what they're saying. I'm easily influenced by all. I'm just like, I heard this guy Lauren in my area say that he had a tofu personality. No matter what you set it next to, it acquires the taste of whatever it's next to. And I thought that was brilliant because, you lock me in a room with a dog for 10 minutes and I'm going to come out barking. And that dog will lose some respect for me, I'm sure. But I drank from the moment I drank. That was my job. Everything else was secondary. I put up with everything else to drink. And I enjoyed it a lot. And I wound up I started drinking with these hippies. I left the bikers and moved up on the scale. I was hanging out with these hippies in Santa Ana. And there's really a bond that comes between a guy on acid and a guy who's drunk talking together, And both of you really believe you're getting something out of the conversation too, which is funny. And I hung out with these people, and there were like 30 people. And they would go to there was a party every weekend at this house in Santa Ana, which is a suburb of Orange County, and it was great. I felt fulfilled. I felt like I was part of something. But then that didn't work anymore. I knew I had destiny ahead of me. These people weren't really up to my standards. Excuse me. And so I turned 21 and I started drinking at the Humdinger in Garden Grove. And I found it. That was it for me. It was a great bar. I took a friend, Mark McSee, this buddy of mine. I had a talk in Fullerton, which is in Orange County, one day, and Mark said, "Where is the Humdinger?" So I said, let's drive by there. So we drive by, and he said, "You want to go in?" And I said, "Nope." And he said, I'll go in and check it out. And I saw him he got out of the car, and I saw him walk in the door. And that door hadn't even finished closing behind him, and he came walking out. He said, "What a toilet. You actually drank in there?" I said, "Yeah." He just shook his head and drove, we drove off, and he believed me. And then the Humdinger wasn't good. They had 4 of them, so I could kind of bounce around. But then there was the Shimmy Shack in Garden Grove, and which is everything the name promises, and the Glow Room. The Glow Room had a massage parlor right next door to them. I mean, you could live on that block. There's a convenience store across the street, a massage parlor next door. Why go anywhere? I could. But I never went to the massage parlor because I thought it would diminish me somehow in my character. I was still very had strong values. And then I moved out of that area and I moved to Santa Monica, which is the beach community by Los Angeles, which is a 40-mile jump. It was my only geographic. Certainly not AA standards. I didn't come out of a blackout on a plane going to, St. Croix or something. I just wound up in Santa Monica. And it was great. I never saw so many weirdos in my whole life. I felt like I'd fit in immediately there. And I was in the publishing industry at this time. I was a clerk in a bookstore. And I wanted to be a writer, and I figured that was a good entry-level position. And I was close to books, I was unloading them off trucks every day and having a great time with that. And I would go home at night and I would put on my tweed jacket that I got at the St. Matthew's thrift store on Main Street in Santa Monica, and I would put on my button-down shirt, and I was the writer, capital T, capital W, and I would sit down. I was going to write something, and I was going to be a writer because somebody told me that I was a good writer. That's all it takes with me. You tell me I do something right once, and that's it for me. I'm ready for it. And I would sit down and I would put a piece of paper in the typewriter. I type my name across the top of it. I type page 1 in the corner, and then I go get a drink. And I'd have a glass of Jack Daniels, and I'd sit there and drink that Jack Daniels, and I'd think, and I'd feel that feeling that we feel when you start swallowing that stuff down. All of a sudden, your body starts to congeal, and you start feeling like a human, capital H. And alcohol I experienced a strange phenomenon. I like to share this because it's true. Alcohol gave me the sensation of a job well done without ever having to do anything. I felt completely, I've done it up here. I lived indoors for a long time, and I was, And I would think about the idea of writing this great story, and I would put on a record, not Born to Lose, but something with a little more pep to it, like Frank Sinatra singing September of My Years. I'm 21 and I'm listening to Frank Sinatra sing Hello Young Lovers, and thinking, yes, it was good back then, wasn't it, And I felt old when I was 11, for God's sake. I'd sit down and I'd drink and listen to records and feel good about me. And I knew that the curtains were drawn back and I could see the future ahead of me, and it was good. And that's all I needed to know. And I just sat there and drank until I passed out. And then I'd get up the next morning with a hangover, and I'd go to that bookstore and I'd unload those books, and I'd work with all those nice people, and they never had to know what I was doing at home, and no one ever had to know. And I could play that game. And I played that game for 13 years of that same cycle of going home and put on the record and get the drink. And it got so I would, after a while, as we all know, or else we certainly wouldn't be here on a nice Saturday morning, after a while the alcohol doesn't do for you. It just doesn't work anymore. It doesn't make your head turn off. It makes your body physically drunk. It makes you still stumble over furniture that you've always known is there. And yet it doesn't do anything for you. When I after I had been drinking a long time, those pieces didn't come up. I maybe got 5 or 6 pieces out of 100. Some days I'd get 50 pieces up and think, great, it's coming together again. And the next day there'd be 5. And I just couldn't figure out what was happening, so I drank more. And I liked drinking. And I used to get into those alcoholic foreplay things, where I get the bottle of Jack Daniels on the way home from work. By this time I was married to a lovely woman, a wonderful woman, a loving woman, a kind woman, a non-alcoholic woman who was neurotic. Between the two of us, we made one complete human. And she just didn't understand. And she wanted to love me. And when it comes to love, I've got a whole pitch for relationships. Let me tell you that. You've got to be suspicious of a relationship where I am the emotional cornerstone, though. You've really got to have your doubts about that one. And that's how it was with me. I was completely helpless. I would give her all my money and have her pay all the bills and take care of all the responsibility. And yet when there was any kind of an emotional crisis where there needed to be someone strong, I was always a strong one. I was always the one who could pull it together. I never got drunk during crisis time. I was always on the straight and narrow and strong. I would drink over other stuff, like the 11-item person in the 10-item or less line. That's what gets me drunk. I go into a rage over people's behavior. I really hate human beings when they behave like I don't want them to behave. Because I try to be considerate of other human beings. Yeah, I like to think that. Then I'm out drunk driving, but I never got caught drunk driving either. And I drove drunk from Anaheim to Santa Monica, which is about 40 miles. I used to drive home drunk every night for a year and a half. And there's a trick to driving drunk, for those of you who don't know, and that is that, drunks get caught when they react to things. When you start drifting over into the next lane and you realize you're drifting and you jerk back into the lane and everybody goes, drunk! He's drunk! If you got any brains at all, when you're drifting over and you realize you're drifting, you don't panic. You just put on your signal and just keep going, They'll move. You just look at them out the window and smile like it's the most natural thing you've ever done. I didn't get caught. I almost got caught. I was in a blackout, and blackouts are great fun. Blackouts are the closest thing I ever experienced to actual molecular transport from one place to another. I remember being at a party at a friend of mine's house in Long Beach, which is about 35 miles from Santa Monica, and I'm saying goodbye at the door. I'm waving, and I turned around. I'm in my apartment in Santa Monica with my car keys in my hand, and I didn't get scared. I just thought, think of the time I'm going to save, All of a sudden, I'm just home. Only trouble with blackouts is you can't plan when you're coming out of them. Sometimes you come out of them and you're in a place where you don't want to be. So you start drinking again to get back wherever it was you were before you arrived. It's like traveling through a time warp, Your body is there, but you're not. You're in some cosmic state. And I came out of a blackout one time getting on the freeway, and everybody's honking at me because I was getting on the off-ramp. If they'd only signed those things better, I wouldn't have that problem. But God damn it, I was mad too. It's like, quit honking! And they're backing me off the off-ramp. I'm backing up in my car on the off-ramp. And I'm backing up and I'm screaming at them, you know. Why don't they sign these off-ramps better, you know? I'm sure the guy behind me thought the same thing. It's just, might have been you, but I just hated. I started to get edgy about my life, you know, and I was married to this woman, and I'd go home. I was getting back to my story. I'd stop at the liquor store on the way home because she wouldn't be home for 2 hours after I got home. That was time, prep time, and I'd go home, and I'd take a shower, get into the writer's costume, and get that bottle of whiskey, and I'd set it on the counter first, and I wouldn't open it, and I'd do this little game because I felt good just having it there. I didn't need to drink it. I've got control. I'm a disciplined alcoholic. Go to work every day. I take a couple of long lunches every so often, but I'm there. I do my job when I'm not hungover, and which means after 11 o'clock, I work up a storm. When that hangover begins to ebb, I'm fine. And I'd leave the bottle there, and I'd walk in and take my shower and come back out and walk to the kitchen, tra-la-la, hi bottle, go by and go into the living room and put on a record, tra-la-la, go by, hi bottle, go in and anoint myself with various colognes and try to smother the smell, because we sort of start to exude alcohol after a while. I mean, it does get into every single pore of your body, and you can scrub for 3 showers a day, and you can't get that smell off. Like, you'll sit down somewhere and somebody will say, somebody been drinking? You know? And you can get rid of it enough to where they can't pinpoint who it is, but it's kind of hard when you've been drinking for 13 years every day and really plowing it down to get that scent off. And I go in and anoint myself, and I'd come back out, and I'd finally get I'd get some ice and a glass when I was still capable of using a glass and ice, and pour that bottle of Jack Daniels on it and listen to it spit and kick and hiss on the ice, and then take the first pull off of that drink. And I knew that was as good as life could get at that moment. And I felt absolutely at peace. The only trouble was I couldn't sustain it. And I started playing the chemical balancing game with alcohol. And I would drink more to try to sustain that feeling, and then wind up overshooting the mark. And my wife would come home and she'd want to talk about things like paying bills and life. I didn't want to talk about that stuff. I want to listen to records and listen to my headphones, and don't bug me because I work really hard and I'm doing the best I can. Get off my back. My big line was, you've always known I was a very private person. Leave me alone. And I'm one of those guys, I'd go to the bar with my buddies and she'd say, well, let's have dinner at 6, my mom's coming over. I'd call her at 6 o'clock and say, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And I'd call her at 6:30 and say, I just got into a real serious discussion about some business things. I'll be home in, what am I talking, bookstore at this bar, you know? And I'll be home in another half hour. And then it'd be 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock before I'd finally get home, drunk, and everything would just be ruined. And she'd be angry, and I couldn't figure out why she was so angry. Because I'm doing what I have to do, and it's really important to me, and she obviously doesn't see the big picture like I do. I know what's important and what's not important. Dinner, you can have dinner anytime, but you can never have that moment that I was having right then when we were talking about whatever it is that we talk about in bars. It always is very important at the time. The next day you can't remember it to save your life. And my marriage fell apart. Blackouts were no good. I didn't have any adventurous blackouts I can share. I came out of one in a dry cleaners, the one I can remember. Why would they call them blackouts? Came out of a blackout in the dry cleaners. Morris, the Martinizing man, was leaning over the counter saying, boxed or hangers. And he had that tone in his voice like he'd said it a couple of times before, but I was still in transit, you know. It's like all of a sudden you just come up out of your body. And he was in, all of a sudden you just arrive where your body is. And in perfect alcoholic form, I said, hangers. And I turned around and walked out of that place, and I thought, what did I bring in there, you know? And Morris, the Martinizing man, had my number anyway, because I had been drunk with a buddy of mine one night. We drank all day long one Saturday. We just drank from about 11 o'clock in the morning till 2:30 the next morning. And on the way out, from the bar at about 10 minutes to 2, we stopped at a liquor store and got some cherry brandy. And yeah, there's some cherry brandy drinkers around here. And I remember waking up the next morning and my face was stuck to the table. It was like that fly. I felt like buzzing, you know, just trying to get off the table. And the sad part was I was in my mother's nightgown. Luckily, she wasn't in it too. I was just. It would have been a different story. I guess that's one of those other program stories. And I had all my clothes on too. I don't know how the sequence of events came about, but I'm buzzing around on the table with this nightgown on, you know. And my buddy's passed out on the floor, and he's looking over there going, nice ensemble. So I got the whole place cleaned up. What had happened, my mother was out of town vacationing somewhere, and I just broke into her house. I didn't even live there. I just broke in, you know, and with my key. But I wasn't supposed to be there, but it was close to where I was drinking. I was supposed to drive back to Santa Monica, but I was safety conscious at that point. And I cleaned the whole place up, and I was on my way out, and the place still stunk. Something really reeked in that place. I couldn't figure out what it was, because I'd done the whole Lysol number. And I grabbed my sweater off the chair, and it weighed about 3 pounds, okay? Your basic 8-ounce wool knit sweater, and I opened it up, and yeah, it was, there was dinner, okay? And put it bluntly. So I took it, and I was so humiliated, you know? And I washed it out in the sink, and I poured cologne all over it, you know, and cleaned it out, and I hung it out on the clothesline, let, you know, summer soft air drift through it, and get a natural scent back into it. But it's like any kind of alcohol. Once you got it, you got it. You know, it takes a long time to get rid of it. And so I took it, and I dried it, and I brought it to Morris, the Martinizing man, and I brought it with a whole bunch of other clothes. You know, it's just like when you buy a porno magazine. You know, you get the Atlantic Monthly, and you buy all that stuff, and you get you know the one. You get 3 men and a teenager underneath in the bottom of it, you know. And I did the same thing when I was buying. When I was bringing in my clothing, if I happened to get sick on anything, I brought in a bunch of other things, like a suit and a shirt and that kind of stuff, and I slide them all across, and he's going through 3 shirts, okay, pair of slacks, okay, sweater. And I don't know if it's just me, but I think alcoholics have a unique perception of the way people see us, and they look at us. And he knew. He had that, you puked in your sweater, didn't you, look on it. And the thing that was sick about it was I knew that he knew that I knew. We had that feedback. Nothing was being spoken, but there was a great deal of communication going back and forth. I know you puked in your sweater, and you know I know, and you know that I know that you know I know. And I was nailed to the wall, and all he did was look at me, and he just said sweater, but I got crazy about that. And then I had to bring my clothing back to him, or else he would think that I knew that he knew that I knew. So in a way, I was being held hostage by my dry cleaner. I don't think you find people out on the street who feel that way. And it made me angry, and it made me trapped, and it made me feel shame. As much shame as any guy ever felt who came out of a blackout slugging it out with the police, or as much as anybody felt shame coming out of a blackout and realizing they had done something to their family. It's the same exact shame. Shame doesn't come in any degree. It's just that feeling that you are you are insignificant in some way and that you are bad in some way. And we feel it. And it leads to, I isolated myself from people. I didn't want them to find out. I'm the only person I know who had to make an amends to one of these sidewalk porno magazine things, I was, in my phase. And I had to make amends to this company. They sell these little, I don't know if they have them in San Antonio, probably not. It's an LA phenomenon. They have, the LA Times, then they have the Herald Examiner, and then Wall Street Journal, and they've got Screw on the street corner. And I used to go, there was a way you could kick the magazine dispenser and take them out for free, I had to make amends to these people. They tempted me, and I gotta apologize for it, but I did. And it was just a seamy life, and but it wasn't that bad by comparison to some, but it was bad enough for me because I had no control over my life. I had no control over what I was doing. I tried to be good, and yet I wanted to still, if it's sleazy, I'm going for it. The worse it can get, I'm going for it. Let's see how deep this bottom is, all right? And I couldn't identify, when I first came to AA, I had trouble identifying with people like, women especially. People get up at the podium and say, and I never have to wake up with a stranger again. I was sitting there in the audience saying, God, the nights I used to dream of waking up with a stranger, And wake up with these damn magazines. And my relationships were, I was married and this was going on. I just had trouble accepting the reality of relationships. I like fantasy relationships. I like being the David Niven of my time. I like being the guy who walks in the room and everybody goes, oh, check it out. The girls are, trying to shinny up my leg. I love it. I just have this vision of being that guy. Or the Errol Flynn, where they saunter up and they get a hold of the back of your jacket and they put their hand in the back of your hair and say, take me home now. And I can sneer at them and say, no, because it makes them crazy. That never happened, it's very hard to drag Errol Flynn out when you look like Sherman in the Mr. Peabody cartoons. But I tried, God knows, I put my best effort into it. And what it got me was I was going to therapy, and therapy didn't work. It worked while I was in the office. It was great. It was perfect. I was in heaven in the office. I got down to Santa Monica Boulevard, and I needed a drink. And I didn't understand why. I just went and drank. I felt so good that I had to celebrate feeling so good, so I go drink. Then I do shameful things, so I have to go back to therapy the next week and find out what the little boy inside of me was trying to say. That bull. So I wound up at a meditation retreat. And after an attempted suicide there, I realized something was really wrong. Suicide was always a very romantic notion in my mind. I had thought about it a lot, but I never seriously thought of taking my own life. That's a commitment. And this was the first time when that fantasy became real. I wanted to die. I wanted to literally, I didn't want to die, I wanted to end my life. I didn't want the experience of dying, because that could be a mess. I never shot myself because I thought, with my luck, I'd squeeze that trigger and it would go through every area of my brain that controls all motor function except thought and hearing. And I knew I would be tied up with a bed sheet and in a wheelchair somewhere, drooling pablum, while someone I knew was yelling at me, "Hi, are you okay today? He looks so much better." And all I could do was just drool pablum and think, if I could get out of this chair, I'd kick your butt. I hate you, because I hate people. But I never tell them that, I try to be wicked, but I'm a nice guy. You know what happens to nice guys? Somewhere between wicked and nice guy, I just got stuck on jerk. I can never get that needle all quite over. And I didn't commit suicide that day because I'd quit the Cub Scouts when I was 11 years old because I didn't like the people in it and I didn't like doing all that stuff. And thank God I never learned how to make a knot because I had my belt off out on this meditation retreat. What they did was we had this guided meditation where they take you around in your mind, and the flute music's playing, and you're laying in the room, and everybody's blissful. You can hear all this regular breathing in the room on the floor, and there's flute music playing on the cassette player, and she's saying, "You're walking through a field, and you feel the grass beneath your feet." And I'm coming off a drunk from the night before. And I'm vibrating on this shag carpet. I can feel every piece of shag spearing me in the back. And you come to a waterfall. And I'm thinking, this is BS. This is crap. I hate this. I hate everybody in this room. Her especially. Because she makes me feel good for 20 minutes, and then I got to live with it the rest of the week. And it doesn't work. And everybody else is doing just fine. And then she said, after we were supposed to wash ourselves in this waterfall. I don't know how many of you have been through this stuff. It's really hilarious when you think about it. But the water is turning different colors. And it's blue. And the blue water washes away your sadness. And now the water's green. And the green washes away your jealousy and anger. Or jealousy and whatever it is. And the red water washes away your anger. And I'm thinking, there ain't enough red water in this universe to wash away the way I feel right now. But I didn't say that. I just played the game. Because I don't want anybody to think I'm different than they are. And I'm just about on the verge of cracking up, and it's over. And she says the thing that every alcoholic wants to hear when they're still practicing. Now I want you to go out on the grounds, which is this beautiful meditation retreat up near Santa Barbara. I want you to walk out on the grounds for the next 5 hours and think about your life and where it's going. And I went out there, and that's what I told you. I was sitting under a tree out in the grounds. I thought, well, it's going nowhere, and I'm going to end it right here. I have to do this. Because what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through this meditation stuff, right? And I'm going to go home tomorrow night, and I'm going to get off the freeway in Anaheim to this house that I'm living in, this 3-bedroom house that I'm going to lose because I keep missing the house payments. It's $125 a month. It's got a lot of scratch to pull together at one time. And I'm going to use my credit card to buy another bottle of Remy Martin cognac because I knew that if I drank good quality booze that I wasn't an alcoholic, and go to Jack in the Box for dinner. And I'm going to get a hangover. I'm going to get drunk and pass out in that place because I don't have a wife to wake me up anymore because she got smart. And she still loved me. And she left. And I'm going to go do that. I'm going to come to Monday morning at 5 o'clock. And I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to drive back to Santa Monica to that I hate, that I can do in my sleep, that I've been doing for 8 years, stepping stone job, that I can't afford to leave now. I'm going to do that job. And then when I get off that job at 4 o'clock, I'm going to drive down to Jolly Jack's in Santa Monica, or I'm going to go to the Orr House, or I'm going to go to one of these places, these nicer places that'll take my credit cards, who won't check on them. And I'm going to get drunk, and I'm going to drive home, and I'm going to drink some more at the Humdinger on the way home. And I'm going to go in my house, and I'm going to drink some more, and I'm going to pass out, and I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning, and I'm going to go back on that freeway again hungover, and I'm going to get to work, and I'm going to do that job I hate, and it's going to go on forever because I can't play it anymore. I can't do it anymore. It won't. There's nothing that is different about my life anymore. I've played all the games. I've run all the promises. I've tapped out all the friends. I've run my bull across everybody that I can think of, and I just don't even believe it myself anymore. And at that moment, I got a glimpse of it. I got that nudge that every alcoholic gets. And that is that higher power that shows us at that moment exactly what we are to him. We see ourselves exactly as we are to whatever it was that created us. And I didn't look real good. I hadn't done anything for anybody, really, without having some kind of self-serving motive to it. I had just been trying my hardest to live life, and I tried to be a good person, and I just couldn't because I was so absorbed in what made me feel good and what I was supposed to be doing and what effect I was having on everything. And I just saw that, and I just sat there and cried. And I don't cry in front of people David Niven would never have cried in front of people. And I sat there and I could not stop sobbing. And I sat there for about 2 hours, and I couldn't stop. And it wasn't a sob of self-pity, and it wasn't a sob of woe is me. It's a sob of what have I done? What has happened to me? I'm 30 years old. I'm almost 31 years old, and I'm thinking that my life is over. And I had so much potential. I had so much stuff going for me, and it's come to this, to where I'm thinking of killing myself in a meditation retreat. Jesus. And it wasn't working. And I went back to the room, and I went to sleep, and I went to the meeting they had that night, this group therapy meeting, and I just sat there. And I went home the next day, and I was going to stop at the liquor store, and I didn't. I just went home, and I thought, if I stop drinking, maybe I won't have to wake up with a hangover tomorrow morning, and maybe something will change. And I did that, and I stayed sober for 5 days without drinking, just not drinking. And my sister-in-law brought me to an AA meeting on my 6th day. It was on a Sunday. I lose track of the time. It might have been my 8th day, but I wasn't keeping track of time because I wasn't thinking about the date of my last drink. And I got to this meeting, and I didn't want to go. I gave her a ride because she needed to go. She just got out of a detox. And she 12-stepped me, and she gave me the message. And she had it infused in her over 28 days, and it was a great message. And I thought it was great for her, and yet I was getting it. And I went to this meeting, and she said, well, come on in and meet my friends. And I thought, oh, joy. I get to meet all of her sick buddies. I went in there, and everybody had on a hospital wristband, And it's only an alcoholic can walk into a place where 90% of the people wear hospital wristbands from a detox center and feel less than, because they've all got wristbands, and I don't have a wristband. And not just feel like, well, they're alcoholics. I felt like I don't belong here because they all know something that I don't know. And then she said, why don't we go out for coffee afterwards? And I thought, oh boy, won't that be fun? You sit around and talk to all your sick friends afterwards, and they're all so nice. They got that nice, smarmy Southern Baptist way about them, Hi, my name's Ted. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd say, hi, I'm Charlie, and I'm just visiting. And it took me months before I could bend my arm to shake hands because I was, giving them this to keep them away. And they were just so nice, and it made me sick, and I hated them. I looked around and thought, I've still got some potential left, and these people are all losers. I still got a spark of life left in me, and I haven't had a drink for 6 days. I can do it on my own. And I heard this guy named Ron speak that night, and he was really funny, and he made me laugh, and he said some things that I understood. And I didn't even realize I was understanding what he was saying. I just thought it was funny, and I realized that most people wouldn't think that stuff is funny. You tell some of these stories at the church social and see what kind of a reaction you get. You talk about, on a nice day, going to the noontime showing of Donkey Lunch at the Pussycat Theater and watch the reaction the churchgoers get. They'll smile. And you talk about shame to them, and they think shame is when you overbake the meatloaf, that's... And I went there, I listened to this guy, and we went out for coffee afterwards, and she said, next week we've got to come because Debbie's taking her 30-day chip. Ooh. Oh, stop, I'm getting hot all over, Who cares that she's taking imagine, a 30-day chip. But something happened that night at that meeting, and that is that I stood up and identified myself as an alcoholic because I was embarrassed not to. I thought I would make you feel all bad and self-conscious if I didn't do it. So I thought, well, when in Rome, and I stood up and said, my name is Charlie, I'm an alcoholic. And they all said, hi, Charlie, they're all smarmy crap. And I sat down and thought, oh, God, that was awful. And Debbie said, you really didn't have to do that. I said, why didn't you tell me that, you manipulative tart? I didn't use those words. I said, really? And that was my journey because those are the 4 most important words I ever said. I am an alcoholic. That is what I am. I am not anything else. That is my primary problem in my life, is that I have to remain vigilant to all the time, is that I am an alcoholic. And I don't believe in hyphenated diseases. And I don't believe in all that crap about, well, I'm an alcoholic who's cross-dependent. What the hell is that? I'm a substance abuser. You know, as far as I'm concerned, anybody who opens and closes Velcro all the time is a substance abuser. Every little thing to keep from being an alcoholic. You're just a drunk is what you are. Your problem is that when you feel like hell, you take a drink so you don't feel that way anymore, and you still feel like hell. But you didn't used to, did you? Or else you wouldn't be drinking again to find out if it would work again. And I never understood that. And I took my share of drugs. But my problem is I'm an alcoholic. I can't take anything. I can't take anything that affects my emotions synthetically. I got to work the steps of this program, and I found that out later on when I got a sponsor. I went to the Pacific Group by mistake. I was tricked into that by a guy named Keith Carpenter. Oh, sorry, Keith C. Scotch that. Yep. And he was. They roll the tape backwards, and Keith invited me to come to this meeting. He says, "I'll be looking for you there." And he's a huge guy, and I thought, God, he will too. So I showed up there, and I found him, and I said, "Hi, I'm Charlie." And he looked at me and thought, "Well, so who are you?" You know, and I thought, "Well, you're supposed to be looking for me. Thanks a lot." And all people said was, "Get a sponsor, get a sponsor, get a sponsor." I said, "I don't need a sponsor. I'm a college-educated guy. I'm really, I don't need this." They kept saying it, "Get a sponsor." And I found out that I saw this guy at a meeting, this big, tall guy named Bill McD. And Bill was nice to me. I had to get up one time and talk at the podium, and I was terrified. I was about 3 weeks sober, and I got up and just said my name and sat down because I didn't want to. What am I going to say? You know, some revelation. And nothing's worse than a 3-week-old with a revelation. You know, my sponsor tells me, whenever you speak, don't share anything that you've thought of in the last 3 weeks, because usually you just float by. And he started me in on the steps, and the first thing he said was, I had shoulder-length hair and a mustache, and I was wearing a deerstalker cap and sunglasses at night when I first came to AA, and I was hoarding food at my house for Armageddon because I thought there was going to be a great race war and there were going to be food riots, and I wanted to have an inside hand on that, and I had all kinds of food stored up in my closets at home. In my linen closets, I had food and rice and sterno and all that stuff saved up. I was at the pre-gun purchasing stage, and Bill said, I said, "Would you be my sponsor?" Because I needed a sponsor. They wouldn't let me off the hook. And he said, "Well, we'll talk about it." I thought, "Hey, listen, pal, I'm doing you a favor. You don't get quality merchandise like this very often around Alcoholics Anonymous." So we went out to coffee after the meeting, and he sat me down, and he said exactly what Clancy told Vince, and that was, "If you want me to sponsor you, there are certain things I'm going to ask you to do that you may not agree with. And if you want me to sponsor you, you better be willing to do that. Are you willing to do anything to stay sober?" And I was. At that point, I realized how much I wanted to drink. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're willing to do anything?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Shave off your mustache." And I said, "What has that got to do with sobriety?" He said, "It doesn't have anything to do with sobriety. Shave off your mustache." And I said, "That is weird." He said, "What did you just promise me?" I thought, why do I have to do that? I've had this. This is my last link to David Niven, you know, is this mustache. And I've had this thing for 12 years. It's part of me. He said, "I'm not going to defend or negotiate with you. You said you were willing to do anything to stay sober. Shave off your mustache. If you shave it off, I'll sponsor you. If you can't, if you don't want to, I understand that. I really understand that, and I love you, but I will not sponsor you. I wish you well in sobriety, but I cannot sponsor you because I was told to do that." So I went home. He said, "I'll see you at the men's stag Friday night." And I went home that was a Tuesday night, and I negotiated with myself all week. And Friday, I was living 40 miles away, so I wouldn't be able to shave before the meeting. So I'm standing at home, looking in the mirror that morning, and I thought, I'm going to see Bill tonight. I want this guy for a sponsor. I like this man. I don't know what it is about him, but he's a good man. I just took the scissors and clipped off one side of the mustache, and so there it's done. And I shaved it off, and I felt horrible. And I went to the meeting that night, and he was absolutely ecstatic. And he said, okay, you're on the road now. You're on the road now. He said, you showed me this time that you're willing to do anything to stay sober. That's a good sign. Now I want you to get commitments at 3 meetings. I want you to go to 7 meetings a week. And he gave me a whole list of things I was supposed to do. And I did them. And I didn't want to do them. I don't want to do that crap. I don't want to mop floors, but I mopped floors. And you know what? I made a lot of friends who were also floor moppers who didn't want to mop floors. And we all stood there and we bitched about how our sponsors made us mop floors. You know what? Every one of those guys is still in my group and we're still sober today. All of us are. And I sat at a meeting and I just fought with this thing. And I went to the men's stag one night. And I can say this because I talked to this guy about it, Al B. And Al was this guy who was going through phases. And he was in his punk rock stage at the time. And he had his hair dyed white and was showing up at meetings with, the studded wristbands and stuff. And I kind of thought this guy had it. He was a rebel, and I liked that. Although I was about as rebellious as Jim Anderson on Father Knows Best, for God's sake. But I liked rebels underneath it all. And here was Al. And Al said at the stag, he was answering somebody's problem. And he said, I don't like doing this stuff either. I don't like this crap. Sometimes I don't want to do with the stuff my sponsor tells me to do, but I do it, and it works. And I've been sober for 8 years. And it just keeps working. And so I just keep doing it, regardless of how I feel about it. And you know what? My life is okay now. And Al's still sober. Al's got about 15 years now. And I'm in this group of people, my sponsor included. My sponsor just celebrated 15 years. And these people I have found over the years really love me, and not in an abstract way. Love is so abstract. These people really show me how to love somebody else, because we talk about God in AA a lot. And we talk about spirituality, and it's easy to come up to the podium and have a lot of spiritual flash from the podium. I can be humble, and bow my head and grieve over the wrong I've done and all that stuff. But I'll tell you what spirituality is, and that is living life at the moment and knowing when to do things that make you uncomfortable in order to make things better. And I found out that this is just something that's come over the years, that I can sit and meditate all I like, and God is not going to talk to me. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh God, please make the brakes on my car better. Oh God, please, I need a better job and more money, and I don't know how to resolve this problem. How do I resolve it, God? And I don't hear God saying, Charles? Charles? The brakes, yeah, okay, the brakes, what you're going to... I never get that kind of reaction. God is over here with Beirut and nuclear waste and all this crap. What's he going to stop and look at oh yeah, you need brakes. Okay, let me just interrupt everything over here and go over and get you some brakes. It doesn't work that way. But I'll tell you where God is, and that is, this is something that I know from my sponsor by watching him and figuring it out, which is, I don't advise people trying to figure things out. But Bill loves people right there, regardless of how he feels about them at the time. And he resolves his problems with them in a healthy way. And I realized, too, that you will never find God in this program or a higher power in yourself, because he's not there for you. He's in there for somebody else to see in you. You can look all you want, and he's not there. But I look at you, and there he is. And I look at you, and I have to want to see him when I look at you. And that's the challenge of being sober, and the challenge of just living, is to try to find goodness in other people and to unite ourselves. That is what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. It's uniting people, people who have never felt united before with anybody, who have always felt isolated and separated and distant and sad about that and hopeless because there's no unity there. And here we are, and we're doctors, and we're businessmen, and we're surgeons, and we're auto mechanics, and we're unemployed. And we're trying to get our lives better. And we're trying to do it by showing up at these meetings. And Vince was, we were talking at breakfast this morning, and Vince was saying, this is the only place in the world where the doctor can be sponsored by the auto mechanic. Where the interior decorator is sponsored by the guy who spent 19 years in prison. Where the prisoner is sponsored by a guy like me. Because we have something here, and we don't know what it is at any given time, really. But we know it when we see it. It's that picture of life that I've always wanted to have. And I know that I'll only find it when I look for it. When I want to see God, I can see him anytime I want to. I have to go out and look in somebody's eyes and say, okay, right at the moment in my own head, I'm not going to say it out loud, people run when you do that. Where are you? You're in there. Let me see you. And if you do that with newcomers, And you do that with people who look like they're hurting more than you are. And you do that with people who are in trouble. And you say, there is God in there, and I'm going to find him. And when I find him, he's going to be in me. And then that person's going to see it in me, because I can't see it. And then we have that bond, and there we are. We're alcoholics. We're two alcoholics talking to each other. And we alcoholics are unique because, as a group, we are the only ones who understand that thing that we're looking for. It doesn't seem to be that way in the general population, I don't think. Because we have something that hangs over our head that is so serious beneath the laughter of these meetings, that is so important to be aware of and to remind ourselves of, is that we will die from this disease if we don't do something today about it. And we can only feel as good as we want to feel about it. And we can only get as much out of the program as we want to get out of the program, as we're willing to put into the program. And that means you never turn down a request made in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's an Alcoholics Anonymous request. You never turn that down. I don't care what it is. I have a full life today. My sponsor urged me to go back to school. I thought his judgment was screwy. I've been back in school for 6 years now. I'm getting 2 master's degrees, one in Renaissance literature and one in teaching. And by doing that, by being back in school, I got tapped on the shoulder at the bookstore one morning, and this woman said, "You're in grad school now, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, she was the dean of studies of humanities, and she said, "We're short one English teacher. We need an English teacher. Can you do it?" And I thought, let me check with somebody first, okay? Let me check my week at a glance. I'll get back to you. So I called Bill that afternoon, and I barely got it out of my mouth, and he said, "Take the job." And I said, "I can't take the job. I work in the bookstore in the morning. They won't let me off to teach a class at 8 o'clock. He said, "Just tell her you'll take the job and see what happens." So I said, "Okay, I'll take the job, but I don't know if I can get out of the bookstore." She said, "I've already cleared it. They're going to give you the time off in the morning." I said, "Damn." So I said, "Okay, but I don't have a credential to teach. Did you know I don't have a college teaching credential?" And she said, we're going to apply for one for you. It's an emergency credential. You're in. As long as you stay in grad school, you can get the credential. Okay, now what? She said, "Well, here's the book. You start Tuesday." No. And I'm thinking this, but I think I said something like, "Okay." And I went home and I studied English that week because I don't know how to teach English. You know, I know how to write, I know how to read, and I know what to look for. What am I going to do? Get them all around me at the desk and say, "Okay, we're going to learn how to write. Are you watching? Okay, here's a pencil. This is paper. There, I'm writing. You getting all this? Okay, see? Now you do it." It's not like that. It involves a lot of energy and a lot of research and a lot of work that I wasn't prepared for, but I did it anyway because I had to do it. And by having to do it, I found some things in teaching that I would never have found if I'd left it to my own judgment and not deferred it to Bill, who knows better about my life from his perspective than I do when I'm standing in the middle of it. And that's what a sponsor is for. You got to lug a piano up a flight of stairs. Why lug it up the flight of stairs by yourself if you know there's a qualified piano mover standing right there who's done it before, and he says, "Can I help you move the piano?" "No, I think I can get it myself." Okay? Yeah, get your end of the piano and show me how to do this. And so far we've been going up the steps with this damn piano. And sometimes we lose our grip and the piano goes down a few pegs. My life, I've had great things happen in sobriety. I've since started teaching high school. I started teaching high school 4 years ago. You talk about a luge ride into hell sometimes. This is a real challenge. Because I was never a teenager. I was an adult at age 11. I missed teenage, and now I'm a teenager, and now I understand them. And that's dangerous because I got to be an adult in class, and I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, you know, dress code, screw it, okay?" But I'm up there saying no. And I like these kids. I love these kids. I like even the bad ones. I even like the ones that are trouble because of this program. I would never have felt that way. I'm learning to like the things that I never liked before, and I'm learning it through you. I sat behind a woman at a meeting one night named Melanie, and I got a lot of friends in AA. I've got friends. That's who I was visiting in New Hampshire. I'm in Texas today with friends. I walked into this meeting, and I felt comfortable and at home. And it wouldn't have mattered if I had the speaker thing on or not. People aren't nice to you just because you're a speaker. Being a big-time speaker in AA is no big deal. It's like being a penicillin monitor in a syphilis ward, for God's sake. But it's important that Because I am no more or no less important than a guy who's got one day who's coming in off the street saying, "What is this?" That's the guy you got to get by the hand and drag in here. And I watched a guy get dumped out of a speeding car by Ohio Street. This is this clubhouse in L.A. And this car went by, and I always heard about this, but I thought it was a cliche. Here comes this big car, pulls up, door opens, out goes this guy onto the walkway. He was a street guy, and he'd been brushed up a little bit. Apparently somebody took him home, threw him in the shower, dried him off, tossed him out. He was reeking of booze. He was shaking. He was, he had that alcohol tan, that liver damage tan. And he came into the meeting, and his name was Jim, and we got him a cup of coffee, half a cup, because he was, trembling. Got him a piece of watermelon, and we sat him down, and he's in the meeting, and it was his first meeting, and he was terrified, because he was coming off a drunk, which is not a good place to be. You don't see many of these guys anymore. The hospitals get them first, but here he is in this meeting, and he's shaking like a leaf in the front row. And what was really poignant about it is he was trying to do everything everybody else was doing. Somebody would get up to speak, and he would clap. Someone would say, "My name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic," and he would say, "Hi, so-and-so," when he realized everybody else was doing it. And he was trying to do it. And then about halfway through the meeting, he started shaking. And I mean, he was shaking bad. And we didn't know what was going to happen to him. And I was sitting right behind him, and this girl, Melanie, who was a sweet, delicate, intelligent, refined young woman who was every bit as alcoholic as Jim, put her arm around this guy. And she kind of was squeezing him and rubbing his arm. And I'm sitting behind him thinking, this is the only place in the whole world where that guy can walk in here and have that woman put her arm around him and understand exactly how he feels. That's what AA is about. It's not that we are, we only talk to people like ourselves. It's that we look for people, anybody who's hurting as an alcoholic, because I hurt as an alcoholic from time to time. And we look for that, and we love each other for that. And that's the only message I've got, and that's what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, is that it's working the steps, it's doing the inventory, it's paying back your debts, it's trying to live your life in a way that would please your Creator. If you can't think of a higher power, just think of something created you with every good thing you have, and you're all good. We're all unique. We are all specialists in something. We all have a gift that we've been given. We can either organize, or we're teachers, or doctors, or mechanics, or we work well with other people, or whatever we are. We all are individual in that respect, but we're all the same when it comes to our disease. And that's what I found in AA, is that my link to you is my disease. And my disease is the worst thing that I have in me that will kill me. And my disease is also the thing that saves me every day. And I thank you for saving me today.